There we go. Good morning. The August 25th, 2021 meeting of the Board of Estimates is now called to order. In the interest of promoting health and safety as we continue to deal with COVID-19, the Board of Estimates continues to meet virtually. At this time, I will call on Comptroller Bill Henry for any corrections, additions, or noted abstentions to today's agenda.
Thank you, Mr. President. There are no changes or corrections for today's meeting. There are no protests for today's meeting. The following items are being deferred. On pages 33 to 35, Bureau of Procurement number 4, contract number B50004951, Environmental Remediation Services, is being deferred to September 15th at the request of the City Administrator. On page 73, Office of the Comptroller, draft Board of Estimates regulations are being deferred to October 6th, 2021 at the request of the Comptroller. The following items are moved to the non-routine agenda. On pages 40 to 41, Bureau of Procurement number 11, contract number B50004090, Network Hardware. Page 54, Department of Audits, Audit Report, the Department of General Services, Biennial Performance Audit fiscal years ended June 30th, 2020 and 2019. Pages 87 to 88, Baltimore Police Department, Professional Services Agreement. No items are being moved to the routine agenda. We have the following abstentions that have been submitted to the board. On page 21, item number 1, Health Department Agreement with Johns Hopkins University. The Honorable Mayor Brandon Scott will be abstaining. On pages 83 to 84, numbers 21, number 22, and number 23, travel requests. Office of the State's Attorney, expenditure of funds. I'm sorry, this is also page 86. These items will be abstained on by Honorable President Nick Mosby. And on page 75, item number 1, Personnel Environmental Control Board, the Director of Public Works, Jason Mitchell, will be abstaining. There are no votes and no rejection of recommended awards.
Thank you, Mr. Comptroller. I now will direct the board's attention to a memorandum from my office dated August the 23rd, 2021, identifying matters to be considered as routine agenda items. Together with any corrections and additions that have been noted by our comptroller, I will entertain a motion to approve the items contained on the routine agenda.
So moved. Second.
It's been moved and properly seconded by the board. All those in favor of approving the items on the routine agenda, please say aye.
Aye.
All those opposed, please say nay. The ayes have it. The routine agenda has been adopted. Now on to the non-routine agenda. The first item for today will be found on pages 33 through 35. Oh, I'm sorry, we deferred that item. Moving on. The next item, the first item for the non-routine agenda today can be found on pages 40 through 41. Item number 11. This is a renewal of contract number B50004090 for computer network hardware in the amount of $7 million. We had a lengthy discussion around this item last week. Typically, historically, City of Baltimore, these types of MOIT type of network hardware, as well as software, as well as maintenance contracts, typically have not been awarded or allowed for participation of minority or women-owned businesses. We just historically have not been able to find the right vendors or have not done our due diligence in identifying and locating folks that could kind of perform and do this work. The concern is that, when we see this reoccurring renewals, we're not necessarily revisiting the idea if we should do market research analysis or identify if there's appropriate vendors that can participate in some of these contracts that we ultimately waive. I expressed my concern about this particular contract last week and its ability to extend 4 more years after the approval takes place on this go around from a Board of Estimates perspective. I think the administration, not as high as up to the mayor, down to the department level, totally agree with that philosophy. And I think the strategy moving forward is that there will not be an extension of this particular contract and there will be a formal full evaluation to see if there are some minority or women local firms that can participate in the procurement of this particular piece. With that, I am satisfied in moving forward. I'm not sure if there's any additional questions or concerns from additional members of this board. Mr. Mayor, the floor is yours.
No, thank you, Mr. President. And I will reiterate what I said last week is that the direction has been given from me to everyone involved to make sure that we do everything in our power to have goals. And we know that the companies exist and that when we bring this contract back, there won't be a 4-year extension, that we bring it back in the way that we all know it needs to be for Baltimore.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor, for reaffirming that commitment. You know, as opposed to trying to go back and remove some of the extensions, you know, I know that the administration is working in good faith to ensure that we continue to reevaluate some of these types of contracts. Pulling this one out and having the commitment from the administration, I think, is good enough to move forward. So again, at this point, you know, I pulled it off to non-routine, but I'm okay with moving forward unless there's any additional questions or concerns from other members of this board. Hearing and seeing none at this point, I will entertain a motion.
I move approval. Second.
It's been moved and properly seconded. All those in favor of approving this item, please say aye.
Aye.
All those opposed, please say nay. The ayes have it. This item is approved. Next item is non-routine item can be found on page 54, Department of Audits. Audit report, the Department of General Services biennial performance audit fiscal year ending in June 30th, 2020 and 2019. As usual, the way we will proceed, we will hear from Mr. Auditor Josh Pash and his team, and then we will give the agency a chance to offer any response that they would like. So first up, as always, Mr. Auditor, the floor is yours.
Good morning, Mr. President, Mr. Mayor, Mr. Comptroller, and members of the Board of Estimates. My name is Josh Pash, and I am the City Auditor. I am here to present the biennial performance audit for the Department of General Services. I'd like to start off by thanking the audit team, the DGS staff, and the real estate leadership for all of their significant efforts on this audit. It was a big undertaking. What I'll be going over is the objectives and the scope and the current findings and recommendations, and then summarizing the implementation status of the prior audit findings. There will be a lot of graphics, so please feel free to stop me in the middle with any questions. So for the objectives and scope, the objectives of the audit were to evaluate whether the Department of General Services has effective processes to identify, track, and monitor the City of Baltimore's building occupancy rate. One of the underlying questions asked for the scope of this project was, is the city utilizing the city's own office space fully before going and renting space from a third party? Another objective was to determine whether the DGS has adequately designed internal controls related to the processes to report the city's building occupancy rate. And then the last objective was to follow up on the previous findings and recommendations. The scope was fiscal years 2019 and 20, and we were focusing on DGS office buildings. Once we had got into the audit, we ended up extending the scope. And the reason we extended the scope was because at the same time, we're doing an audit for Department of Housing and Community Development related to tracking and reporting on vacant property. And doing both these audits at the same time, we were looking for interrelating data sets. And in this process, we observed that the city does not have one system where all city-owned vacant property is recorded and identified. In addition, during this audit, we also noted that the DGS is responsible for only a portion of the city's real property, and we could not easily get a full listing of all city-owned property. So we extended the scope to include identifying vacant city-owned property and getting an integrated list of city-owned property. the first graphic, we have for our first finding, we noted that the city does not have an efficient and effective process and a system to identify, record, update, and maintain a unified inventory listing of all cities' real property, including city-owned real property. I want to make a note that is, according to the Department of Real Estate's nomenclature, the city-owned vacant property does not include vacant properties which are formerly private-owned properties acquired by the city. And the next slide, I'm going to flush that out. And the reason for that is those vacant properties that were acquired from private-owned properties, such as properties that were not safe and acquired, or properties that had liens on them and were acquired by the city, is those are not for municipal use. So to put things into perspective, we put together an illustration of occupied versus occupied versus vacant properties. The ovals to the left, the top city-owned occupied property and city-owned vacant property, including the overlapping formerly vacant properties acquired by the city, are all officially and legally titled to the city. However, the center overlapping former vacant properties acquired by the city are not tracked and monitored and maintained. Those properties of that were acquired, and those are not tracked and maintained by different agencies. They are basically held for disposal and they're not used for municipal use. And then on the right side, we put vacant private properties, which are properties that have been identified by the DHCD property vacant property notices, and those were to put in comparison. So basically, those properties were acquired by the city, and they have that overlapping space. The entire list of city-owned property, which is the two left circles, is about 10,000 properties. 8,300, which is the center overlapping, is made up of about 7,000 that are listed under the Department of Housing and Community Development, and about 1,300 that are listed under real estate. The other ones, which are the left half of the city-owned vacant property and the occupied city-owned property, make up about 1,700 properties. The next slide, basically we get into our objective, our extended objective of getting the unified list of city-owned property. And what we noted is that there's no one system where all city-owned properties are recorded and identified. And when looking for the most complete list, it came to the legacy mainframe system, which is in the center, which is managed and maintained by Department of Transportation's property location section. And that is basically fed from two sources on the left. So Department of Transportation will get updates from the Land Records and Licensing Division, Circuit Court, of changes in ownership of that city-owned, not city, Baltimore City, in the city limits, all real property, and make those changes to the legacy mainframe. And then internally, when the Space Utilization Committee either transfers property from one agency to another, decides to acquire property or dispose of property, that will also be added into the legacy mainframe. We also noted here the DHCD has their databases, and their databases are, some are fed from that legacy mainframe and then updated from CHIP and other databases. And CHIP is the program where vacancy buildings, not city owned, not for municipal use, are identified, and that's how they're tracking those. There is no reconciliation of the data from the legacy mainframe to the DHCD system, and DGS tracks properties they're maintaining, but that's separate from these two systems also. And so they have a work order system, Archibus, and they also have spreadsheets. Archibus, they are working to make more robust and to track more information about different office space and properties, but that is in process. I also wanted to note here that in order to get information out of the legacy mainframe, most of the time you have to go to BSIT to run a report, and that will feed other agencies such as the Department of Real Estate to create their databases. I also want to note that this graphic only shows 3 agencies, and there are other departments such as Rec and Parks, Department of Planning, Department of Public Works that also maintain and manage real property that are not part of this graphic, and they also have separate systems. And this kind of led us to the expanding of the scope, and this is to put that into perspective. I'm going to go ahead and pause here because sometimes there's questions on this slide. Okay, the last thing I wanted to note about this was that the legacy mainframe does not denote if city-owned property is vacant or not vacant. And that is considering only the 1,700 properties that Department of Real Estate considers like city-owned property. It's not including that overlapping section of properties that were acquired by the city just because, not for municipal use, we'll say. Okay, so to kind of get more in deep this, we looked for the causes, and the main causes we found was that there's no citywide formal policies and procedures outlining who's supposed to be doing what in the roles and responsibilities. And that includes what role the Department of Real Estate has and how that interacts with the different agencies. And then we also noticed just, over years that management and ownership of city-owned real property has becoming increasingly more decentralized. And that has led to these various databases and data sets, and there's been no overarching agency to basically address that, and then to also work on making a core consistent database that has kind of like the true baseline. And basically that has just expanded to multiple different databases. So we put in some recommendations, and the recommendations is in the city charter, there is a statement that Department of Real Estate will maintain and basically oversee the process of city-owned properties. And so the recommendation here was addressed to the city comptroller to work with the heads of those affected agencies, basically any agency that is responsible for maintaining, managing, owning, acquiring real property, and then to establish a unified real property inventory system, and then processes to basically include all city-owned property, because for decision-making purposes, including those formerly owned private properties, and then to just manage that overall database. Now, part of this recommendation and part of the understanding is that we don't have, there's no issue necessarily with other agencies having their own databases with own data sets, as long as that they all can tie together and have one core set, so that each one, there'll be a set of information, say like address and ownership and various information that will be consistent across all databases. And that is necessary in order for the city just to manage and maintain this population. So then that brings us to our second finding. The city doesn't have a process to collect and maintain agency buildings occupancy rate or vacancy rates, and this comes to the original scope of the audit. And there is no process over that to even calculate and to report. So, we did note that DGS has an initiative to improve the tracking and building occupancy and vacancy rates. However, it is not fully built out, and that's in process. We also had the concern there that that process was just a DGS process, which is only working with a certain, a subset of the city-owned properties. And then, so basically that goes into the third bullet point, which the agency's building occupancy rates, there's no consistent measurement. And so what the DGS has typically done is identified utilization as is an office being assigned to or, rented to a certain agency. And if that is being rented to a certain agency, then that's considered occupied space. And there is not at this time an evaluation of how much space, if an agency has, a 10,000 square feet or 500 square feet, and then how that is, being allocated out, whether it's by a common denominator of people. And we also notice there's not a consistent base of square feet to kind of compare one office space to another office space. So basically each office space is considered a one unit, which makes it challenging to compare. So getting into our recommendations, this recommendation is addressed to the mayor and the comptroller, and that is to come up with a consistent building occupancy rate, vacancy rate, and to use a common base. Our research had always indicated square feet, and so we put that in the recommendation. However, if there is a consistent base other than that the city would like to use, that's a management decision. And then basically come up with formalized processes to keep and maintain this. And then we made a recommendation addressed to DGS, which is to formalize consistent data collection activities and have that consistent across the board, and then to formalize this with policies and procedures. This moves to finding 3. DGS does not have written agreements for all city-owned buildings managed by DGS. So when we were looking for supporting documentation of the different relationships, which is similar to a landlord-tenant relationship between DGS and agencies, there is not a formal agreement between each of those relationships. So we notice that DGS manages city-owned buildings and rents office spaces to the mayor, comptroller, city council, city agencies, and some non-city agencies, for example, the War Memorial. And we noted that there's formal agreements with many of the tenants, but when it comes to the mayor's office, the comptroller's office, and city council, and those required by legislation, which I guess what historically has been done is this is not really an option of DGS to kind of allocate these spaces. There's been no lease agreement with them. There are charges, internal service fund charges that go back and forth, but there's no formal agreement between those groups because it's required by legislation. However, we recommend, and this was with discussions with a number of parties, including real estate and DGS and legal, and the best practice would be to have some agreement, formalized agreement that would identify what the responsibilities of DGS are and what the responsibilities and I guess rights and terms of the tenant occupying the spaces. And we know that there are pros and cons to the type of agreement. And so basically we gave some examples of a formal written lease or a memorandum of understanding, or just a service level agreement between those parties. And that way everyone's on the same page and there's a source document that everyone has agreed to when looking at changes. Moving on to the implementation of prior audit findings, there were 4 prior audit findings. 3 were fully implemented, and 2 of those fell under percentage of work orders closed on time. One was related to developing formal policies and procedures for work order creation. That was completed. One was to formalize report standards for corrective maintenance and preventive maintenance, and also to reevaluate the current data capturing process for those targets. Those were fully implemented. And then in a separate category, we noted that DGS system was capturing the average miles per gallon of fuel consumed, but it was not being monitored. So the recommendation was that there be a monitor and review process to look to oversee the fuel system. And we did note that that was fully implemented because DGS created a process and sent those reports out to the respective agencies to monitor their fleet. However, we did not look at the process of those agencies overseeing the process. And so that is something that we have on our bucket list in the future to take a look at. And then one finding was partially implemented, and this was also under percentage of work orders closed on time. We noted that formal policies and procedures for corrective maintenance work orders were developed. However, they were not fully implemented. And then we have a new completion date of October of 2021 to get those into process and training complete.
Thank you, Mr. Auditor. At this point, are there any questions or concerns from Mr. Auditor regarding his extensive and detailed report? Mr. Mayor, I yield the floor to you.
No, thank you, Mr. President, and thank you, Mr. Auditor, for such a very detailed report. I just raise my hand to say that it's greatly appreciated. This is one of the things, especially around the tracking of city-owned property, that I have tasked the city administrator with, because it was something that was extremely concerning to me when I assumed this position, that there was no one system or talking systems that could tell us something, which is something that we should have at this point. He, DGS, and the rest of the team are already working towards figuring out how we can have those systems and building those practices and best practice policies to make sure that we're keeping track of our assets, which will allow us and inform how we're not only maintaining them, but making sure that we are using the right amount and having the right amount of those spaces. So thank you very much, and look forward to the partnership with you, the comptroller, and everyone else as we work together to improve these practices.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. At this time, are there any other questions or concerns for the auditor? Hearing and seeing none, thank you, Mr. Auditor. Next up, we'll have the agency. Director Nash, the floor is yours.
Good morning, Council President Mosby, Mayor Scott, Comptroller Henry, honorable members of the board. My name is Chichi Miyaga Nash, and I'm the Director of the Department of General Services. Before I begin, I would like to ask if, because of the order in which the findings were presented, if Comptroller Henry would want to weigh in on finding number 1 before I get into finding number 2 and 3, which were much more heavily weighted towards DGS.
Mr. President?
Ms. Comptroller?
Okay. I was going to let Mr. Andy Frank, Director of the Office of Real Estate, respond to finding 1.
Mr. Frank, the floor is yours.
Good morning, Mr. President and honorable members of the board. I'll be brief. The timing of the audit and findings are—
I'm sorry, Mr. Frank. Is there any way you can turn your volume up a little bit?
Yes, let me see how to do that.
You want to try it now?
I don't see it.
All right, well, just try to speak, I guess, really loud. It's a little low, the volume.
Okay, is that any better?
It's a little better.
Okay, the timing and audit of the findings are fortuitous because the real estate department within the comptroller's office, with the support of the mayor's office, is undertaking a citywide real estate review of the city's acquisition, disposition, and leasing policies and practices, and most relevant to the audit, a deep dive into the database management and transaction systems. So the same agencies that are listed in the audit recommendations are part of the real estate review. So in our response to audit, we said that we have committed to incorporating the findings and the recommendations of the audit into the scope of work of the real estate review so that we have a seamless, comprehensive look at all things related to real estate. And I'm happy to answer any questions.
Just one quick question from me, Mr. Frank. What's the expectation of the group to do the full-scale evaluation and come forward with recommendations?
In terms of time frame, we expect to have this done by the end of December, and we're looking at acquisition, disposition, and leasing primarily, then all other aspects of a comprehensive and cooperative basis of all the agencies that are involved in real estate.
Got you. So enough time for us to ensure that from a budgetary perspective, we'll be prepared for the next budget to implement the recommendations.
Yes, I think so.
Are there any additional questions or concerns from members of this board? I think we're on item number one, finding number one, for Mr. Andy Frank or even DGS. Hearing and seeing none, Director Nash, the floor is back to you.
Thank you, sir. Before I begin, I just would like to take this opportunity to thank Mr. Pash and Ms. Mong and their team for the positive interaction that we had with them during this audit, and for their thoughtful questions, and for yet again raising concerns that are valid. And we always appreciate the interactions that we have, because it identifies for us areas where there might be room for improvement. Before I jump into audit finding number two, I would like to respond to the one prior finding that was only partially implemented. So as was noted, the SOPs, the portion of creating SOPs to manage the category of work orders that are considered closed, that was completed. Where we did not finish the process was in the training, and unfortunately that was primarily driven because of COVID. The individuals who would need to be trained are primarily those who are in the field. It's our building repairs, our plumbers, our carpenters, and these are not people behind a computer where we could very easily switch to doing an online training, and so that got delayed during the pandemic. And so I just wanted to point out why we were deficient in completely implementing that finding. Regarding finding number two, we are in agreement. DGS is in agreement with the finding, and as was stated, this is something that is already underway. Our desire is to be able to verify exactly how much square footage we have in our facilities and how much of that is occupied, how much is vacant. Both from a fiscal perspective, as we calculate our square footage rental rates, we need to make sure that we are accounting for every square foot that we own and manage to be able to recoup the equivalent amount of rent to be able to manage those spaces. And so for us, it's not just an exercise on paper. It is one that is needed to be able to keep the operation moving. For several years, we have been moving in that direction. We've taken steps such as, so we have architects on staff, and they have been for the last few years going into the spaces and measuring the spaces and creating CAD drawings that illustrate the footprint of every floor of every building that we manage, and being able to allocate that space to the occupant. So on any floor of any building, we can identify with a CAD drawing with very specific details which agency is occupying which portion of which floor. So that has been an ongoing project. We also initiated or actually completed a project to do internal 360-degree pictometry. So we also have those images of our interior spaces, which have helped us in the calculation of the square footage. Where we had not reached was in identifying, to Mr. Pash's point, which of those spaces are truly unoccupied. So they might be assigned and being rented to an agency, but without either regular audits of the space or feedback from the agencies, we're not privy to exactly how this space is being used. And so we do realize that is information we do not have at our fingertips. Our PMPS team, Property Management and Portfolio Services team within DGS is tasked with and has been doing a fabulous job of identifying what spaces are vacant, because they are the ones who essentially move our tenants around when space is required. They are the first people that we call on when we're trying to find space within our buildings, and they are the ones who work directly with Mr. Frank in the real estate office. And they are moving forward with ensuring that we're better able to track the inventory. And so it will be that team that is working on the SOPs that will govern how we collect the square footage data, how we report out on it, and what system, how best to use the Archivist system to do that. So in conclusion, we are completely in agreement with finding 2 and are well on our way to putting in place what was identified as the recommendation. Similarly, with recommendation number 3, we are in full agreement. We are somewhat blind to, no, that's not true. We're not blind to. We know exactly who's in the spaces. We just don't have agreements on paper with some of our tenants. And as you pointed, Mr. Pash, most of those are the ones that DGS is required to find space for. So whether it's the circuit court or the district court or War Memorial or the elected officials and their staff, we did not have lease agreements on file for them. Prior to the beginning of the audit, actually this conversation started several months ago, we had started discussions with the real estate office about an alternative means of reaching agreement between DGS and our tenants, and had looked to moving more towards an SLA model, because the ability for us to be able to have on paper in a shared understanding between both parties, what are the tenants' responsibilities, what are the landlord's responsibilities, and what is the cost of the space is important, because having that clarity as agencies think about either expanding or reducing their space, it's important that they know what the implications will be on their budget. And then just to round all this up, I will say that there is a larger initiative currently in progress at DGS, and that is creating what we're going to call our Dgs Building Standards. So that's going to be not just when it comes to construction and constructing things within a certain standard, along with what we're already bound by the Green Book, but also internally identifying what is the appropriate square footage allocation for an agency? What is the appropriate space for an office? And using that as the default, and any deviation from there will be a conversation. So moving forward, as we construct space, as we renovate space, there will be a standard that we are following, so that there's consistency across the city and how in what offices look like, which will then better enable us to manage those spaces and just have essentially equity within the allocation of those offices, and why one office should look like another office if similar functions are being performed within those offices. So yeah, I would just like to close with, again, thank you, Mr. Pash, thank you, Ms. Mong, and we look forward to fully implementing the recommendations of this audit.
At this point, thank you, Madam Director. Are there any additional questions or concerns from members of this board for DGS or real estate? Mr. Auditor, the floor is yours.
Hi, I just want to make one clarifying remark regarding the miles per gallon fuel access. DGS provides access to the system that has those the fuel usage in it. It's not a report that's actually distributed, and so I just want to make that clarification.
No, thank you, Mr. Auditor. At this point, are there any additional questions or concerns for members of for Mr. Auditor, DGS, or real estate? Hearing and seeing none, thank you, Mr. Auditor. Thank you, Mr. Frank, and definitely thank you, Madam Director, for providing us information regarding this performance audit. Seeing that there's no further questions or concerns from the board, we'll note this receipt of the audit and we'll move forward. The final item on today's non-routine agenda can be found on pages 87 through 88. The Baltimore Police Department Professional Services Agreement. On behalf of BPD, we have Mr. Eric Melicon to walk us through this item. Mr. Melicon, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Council President. Good morning, honorable members of the board. The Baltimore Police Department is seeking approval for its digital marketing campaign. which is used to recruit new officers to our ranks. This program represents a cornerstone of BPD's enhanced efforts to modernize and expand our reach to recruit qualified applicants to become police officers in our city. This agreement represents the third year of our department engaging with digital marketing tactics, the result being a nearly doubling of the volume of online applications that the department sees annually. Our digital marketing effort is tied to our website, bpdrecruit.org, but it is also engaging several other major job platforms, such as Indeed, LinkedIn, and job boards from HBCUs, but also social media sites like Facebook and Instagram, as well as leveraging Google AdWords to promote our site to those searching for careers in law enforcement. In years 1 and 2, the amounts for this effort were $200,000 and $700,000 respectively. For this agreement, we're asking the authorization of up to $1 million in funding for the effort. To ensure we're moving as expeditiously as possible for the directive of our federal court and our consent decree mandates around achieving our staffing plan goals, we've been working with the law department to ensure that we can engage this effort with the first $500,000 that we already have in hand. Our submission to the state of Maryland for a grant for the remaining funds is working its way through the approval process and will come to the Board of Estimates at a later date. When we submitted this agenda item a few weeks ago, we did not have a clear timeline on when that state funds would arrive. So the structure of this agreement is designed to ensure that we can proceed with all due haste to engage this effort with the money we do have now. Once the subsequent funds from the state arrive and are later accepted by the Board of Estimates, we will then immediately be able to draw down on those funds and proceed with the full authorization of this agreement. So BPD does ask for favorable approval of this agenda item. Thank you very much for your consideration.
No, thank you, Mr. Melicon. At this point, I would like to turn the floor over to Mr. Comptroller. Mr. Comptroller, I yield the floor to you.
Thank you, Mr. President. Good morning. So I just want to make sure I understand, why couldn't this agreement just be drafted with the initial cost of $500,000 that matches the money that is actually currently allocated to spend on this item, and then bring the agreement back to the board for an amendment once the additional $500,000 in grant funds that you're expecting are received?
Thank you, Mr. Comptroller. I appreciate that question. I think the biggest concern we had is the speed of which we're getting these approvals from our legal agreements. Having one agreement, blanket agreement, that authorizes the $1 million in this two pockets of money, 500 and 500,000, allows us to move with all due haste to be able to leverage what we have in hand, have the agreement, the underlying agreement approved, and then be able to proceed as soon as those funds are approved from the state by the Board of Estimates later, to immediately draw down on them with the underlying agreement in hand. So, we work with our colleagues at the law department to confect what we have, and so that we can move with all due haste.
Okay. I think you kind of touched on this in terms of the importance of meeting the goals of the consent decree, but can you be just very explicit about why can't this wait until the additional $500,000 grant from the Office of Crime Control and Prevention is available? What's the harm to the department in waiting another couple of weeks until the contract is fully funded?
Right. So that's, again, thank you for that. There's a very cause and effect relationship happening when we don't have these funds authorized. Currently, we are working to essentially stretch the funds that were previously authorized in the previous agreement. And we've seen a marked reduction, actually, in the number of applications as a result, as much as a 35 to 40% reduction in the volume of our applications. Every week that we are waiting on this, and every month that we're waiting for the approvals to get done, hurts us and it hurts our ability to really put our foot on the gas and expand that digital reach, which we know is having a demonstrative impact on our ability to recruit qualified applicants. Last year, we saw the largest number of recruits in a single decade. That's directly attributable to the start of that pipeline being as open as wide as possible. This is that avenue by doing so, and every week that we are having these administrative concerns and delays, brings us, fewer applicants in the door. We think we have a good agreement that lets us proceed with all due haste with the money we have in hand instead of, waiting for that administrative process to work with the state funds. And so that's what we have for you today.
Okay, I don't think that this counts as a question as much as a leading statement and just to share with the rest of the board that Audit's approved this contract, but there are what I think are legitimate concerns about the precedent it sets for the way that the contract is drafted. I get what the department is getting at, but my understanding is that it doesn't meet the best practices. So it ends up creating this tricky little situation where on the one hand, you've got the BPD asking us to approve an agreement not to exceed $1 million. And even though the city only has $500,000 in funding currently available, I get that we fully expect to receive the other $500,000 in the near future. So from the police department's perspective, I understand that it seems like a potentially dangerous waste of time to not only have to come back for authorization to spend the second pot of grant money, but to also have to submit a contract amendment. And that's what I'm picking up as the BPD's concern, is that if they amended this contract, it would necessitate a second contract review. And given how long contract review can take, that is what would create the real delay in spending the funds and meeting our recruitment goals. But on the other hand, what I'm hearing from the city auditor is that technically this isn't the best way to do it. That in a situation like this, the BPD really should draft the agreement with an initial value of the $500,000 that we actually have now. And just when you come back to get the approval to spend the additional funds, amend the amount in the agreement. The fact that doing it the right way takes longer isn't in and of itself a good reason to not do it. And I think that the option that neither are focusing on is, and this is where I'm going to be reaching out to help from the mayor and the administration, the importance of working to make contract review less time consuming. If we can make our process more effective and efficient, then I would hope that this would be the last contract like this that has to come to the board because of the concerns that the BPD has laid out. So, Mr. President, I just wanted to say that my office will be working internally to make this happen, and I hope to work collaboratively with the administration on making sure that all of the different parts of contract review are appropriately staffed and otherwise resources so that we can all do this job expeditiously.
Thank you, Mr. Comptroller. I think I see the hand of Mr. Solicitor. Mr. Solicitor, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Mr. President. Let me just make a couple comments. First of all, the law department will fully participate in expediting the process. That's easy, and we'll work hard at it with the controller's office. Second point is there's not legal jeopardy here for the city to owe the second $500,000. We're comfortable that the contract does not allow that to happen. Third, and maybe most importantly, I sit in every month, sometimes twice a month, on the hearings for the consent decree. The judge in charge of this is absolutely adamant about the need to increase the staffing. We're well behind our staffing levels that are projected as being needed. The judge, every single meeting, says we all need to step forward. He looks at me over and again. The city needs to do its part. The recruiting has been effective, and last year we did pretty well. We recruited maybe a half dozen more than we lost. But this year, the first half of this year, has fallen off considerably. And the judge is getting more and more emphatic about how we have to fill this hole. Meanwhile, it's getting more and more difficult to recruit because most police departments are in the same position. So we're really in a jam. I hope we never come back to the Board of Estimates with a request while we're in such a jam. I hope we get out of the jam. But I do think that it's really important, more important than usual by far, to move this process along. And I wouldn't be doing my duty if I didn't share with you all the pressure that's coming from that end. Thank you.
No, thank you for laying those concerns out to us, Mr. Solicitor. At this point, are there any additional questions or concerns from other members of the board? Ms. Comptroller, I yield the floor to you.
Yeah, I just wanted to quickly respond. I understand and fully appreciate the pressure that the department and thus the city are under in this, which is why we worked very closely with the police department in making sure that this item was available to consider today, and why I'm going to be supporting us moving forward with it. What I'm looking for is just, let's see if we can fix some of the other processes outside the police department so that neither the police department nor any of our other agencies find themselves in a position where they feel they have to do this to meet their goals and needs. That's all. So thank you, Mr. President.
No, thank you, Mr. Comptroller. Don't want to belabor the topic, but we'll just add a little bit of my thought process behind this. Definitely understand the concerns around our contract process and the timeliness of it, and the issues that kind of flow into the Board of Estimates. And sometimes we always seem to be in a rush because the process is so mundane and kind of takes so long. But for this particular item, Mr. Comptroller, kind of look at it from a different perspective. You know, as a member of this board, I would rather evaluate something in its collective as a whole. You know, particularly when we're talking about either federal or state funds, because, you know, literally it's our money that we're leveraging to get, you know, the same 100% equal amount from the state, you know, in this one contract, knowing that that money cannot be used for anything else other than what we're approving today as it relates to city funds. And when that money comes in, we'll get a chance to reevaluate it. I think it kind of makes sense to package that up as one contract. Again, you know, I look forward to the work that you're going to do and working with the administration to kind of go over and look at the contract perspective. But from an efficiency perspective, I think it's probably best for the board to be able to look at contracts as opposed to in piecemeal. I would prefer to look at the contract altogether, particularly when we're making decisions about, you know, limited resources that we have to kind of put out for really important items like this. So that's kind of, you know, kind of where I'm at. It's not a question, just more of a comment, you know, based off of, I guess, what Mr. Comptroller as well as Mr. Solicitor were able to add today. At this point, I'll take any additional questions or concerns. Hearing and seeing none, I'll open the floor up, entertain a motion.
I move approval.
Second.
The item has been moved and properly seconded. All those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
And all those opposed, please say nay. The ayes have it. This item is approved. Are there any comments, questions, or concerns from the board I'd like to bring up at this point? Hearing and seeing none, as there's no new business at the desk before this board, we will recess until bid opening at 12 noon. The Board of Estimates will reconvene on Wednesday, September the 1st at 9 a.m. I'd like to thank everyone for tuning in. Baltimore, we love you.
Okay. Good afternoon. The Board of Estimates is now in session for the receiving and opening of bids. As part of the overall effort to limit transmission of the COVID-19 virus, the Board of Estimates is conducting bid openings virtually. Members of the public can call in to listen to bid openings live by calling 443-984-1696 and entering access code 0842939. Board of Estimates meetings are broadcast live on Charm TV, channel 25 on Comcast Cable in Baltimore City. Meetings are also streamed on the internet at www.charmtvbaltimore.com. Members of the public can go to that website and click on the live stream link at the top of the homepage. The Board of Estimates will continue to conduct bid openings virtually as the city continues to assess options for reopening City Hall and conducting public meetings in person. The board has received the following addendum for today. Department of Public Works solicitation number WC 1284, Brewers Hill Neighborhood Water Main Replacement. Bids are due September 1st, 2021.
I move that we note the addendum.
Second.
Moved and seconded. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Motion passes. All right, the first bid to be received is proposal TR 21018, urgent need contract citywide. Should be a bid bond of 2% if the bid is over $100,000. The first, first bid is from Potts and Callahan Incorporated. With a bid bond and a total bid of $4,405,800 and no cents. All right, this completely fell apart without that. The second bid is from Penagua Enterprises Incorporated. I have the bid bond as page 352.
Yep.
Okay, with a bid bond and a total bid of maybe that's not the total bid. Let me just make sure. Yeah, okay. A total bid of $1,529,027.50.
I have.
Okay. Our next bid is from ENR Services Incorporated.
With a bid bond?
With a bid bond. And a total bid of $1,820,767 and no cents. The next bid is from Manuel Luis Construction Company Incorporated.
With a bid bond?
With a bid bond and a total bid of $1,757,812.55. And then the final bid for this proposal, which is from P. Flanagan and Sons
Bid bond?
with a bid bond. It has a total bid of $1,474,847.00.
I move that we refer these to the Department of Transportation for tabulation and report.
Second.
Moved and seconded. All in favor say aye.
Aye.
All opposed, nay. Motion carries. Are we ready to do item 2, or should we skip to item 3? Okay, we will skip proposal number 2 and go to item 3, which is a proposal for contract B50006213, debris removal, litter, trash, etc., from waterways and shoreline areas. This is an itemized bid, and I'm going to pass this down, and then all right. This first bid is from Demo USA Incorporated. And that is the only bid for that proposal.
I move that we refer this to the Bureau of Procurement for tabulation and report.
Second.
Moved and seconded. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Motion carries. Moving on to item 4. This is from procurement contract B50006240, heavy equipment rentals and operator services. This is also an itemized bid. And the first bid is from Jesco Incorporated. And the second bid is from Potts and Callahan Incorporated.
Yes.
I move we refer these to the Bureau of Procurement for tabulation and report.
Second.
Moved and seconded. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Motion carries. Item 5, proposal B50006244, scrap tire collection, disposal, and recycling service. No bids were received. Was that the same issue with 6? Or we're going to skip 6? Oh, no, we have 6. All right, item number 6 is procurement contract B50006261, parking meter coin collection services. This is also an itemized bid. The first bid is from Republic Parking. The second bid is from Laz Parking.
Yep.
And the third bid is from ABM Parking Services.
I move we refer these to the Bureau of Procurement for tabulation and report.
Second.
Moved and seconded. All those in favor say aye. Aye. Any opposed? Motion carries. All right. We're going to go to contract number 7, proposal B50006263, provide and deliver liquid propane. This is an itemized bid. The first bid is from, is that H.J. Poist Gas Company?
Yes.
Okay. I was looking for a typed version of that, but I'm not seeing one, so we'll go with that. And the second bid is from Feral Gas LP. All right.
I move to refer these to the Bureau of Procurement for tabulation and report.
Second.
Moved and seconded. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Motion carries. Moving on to number 8, which is procurement proposal B50006284, OEM parts, diagnostic, maintenance, service, and warranty repairs for international medium and heavy trucks. This is an itemized bid. And the first and only bidder is Beltway Companies.
I move we refer this to the Bureau of Procurement for tabulation and report.
Second.
Moved and seconded. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Motion carries. The 9th item is proposal B50006291, full-size SUV equipped for police. No bids were received. And now we're going to go back and get item 2, which is procurement proposal B50006097, asbestos abatement services. These are also itemized bids.
Right. I think those are 2 separate.
I think you're right. All right.
No? Yeah.
Okay, the first bid is from Atlas Realty Incorporated.
Wait a minute. Atlas got it. Thanks.
The second bid is from Compliance Construction Remediation Incorporated. The third bid is from Modellus LLC. The next bid is from Retro Environmental Incorporated. The The next bid is from Atmos Solutions Incorporated. The next bid is from First Potomac Environmental Company. The next bid is from K&K Adams Incorporated. The next bid is from Adisa Enterprises LLC. The next bid is from Goel Services. The next bid is from Alec LLC. Okay. And then the last bid is from C&W Construction.
I move that we refer these to the Bureau of Procurement for tabulation and report.
Second.
Moved and seconded. All those in favor say aye. Aye. Any opposed? Motion carries. That being all the business before the Board of Estimates stands in recess until its next meeting next Wednesday, September 1st at 9 a.m. Thank you all for tuning in and stay safe.